How y'all doing? Um, I've been getting yelled at for not doing videos, and frankly, we've just been really busy. Having fun, trimming every day, all day, wiring every day. So I figured I would do a video on black pines, because it just so happens that this is the time of year to do work on black pines. Unfortunately, we can't grow white pine here. We're 9B and we're just a little bit too hot for it. Red pines will grow here, but they don't thrive. But black pines do fabulous here in Central Florida, as long as you follow a few caveats. This particular black pine I actually grew from seed. Started it in 1999. Put it in the ground in 2003 to 2006. It was in a raised bed, and I used bonsai soil, actually mostly lava rock, and they didn't grow nearly as fast as I thought they would. Mostly my inexperience growing stuff in the ground, I think. But this guy after that went right into a container, and he's never been in the ground since. Had I had him in the ground and did the proper way with having a sacrificial branch and let it grow really tall, I probably would have had myself a really nice fat trunk in 4 or 5 years instead of a fairly small one, but that's okay. Live and learn. General maintenance on black pines here in Central Florida, the way we do it, and there is various ways to make black pine bonsai. The way we do it is in the spring when they start to grow, we start feeding them with, if it's a refined black pine, we start feeding them with biogold. We'll put them in the baskets, and we'll put the baskets every 4 inches around the perimeter, and we start feeding them with biogold. And every 2 weeks we actually add more biogold, to where by the time June comes along, we have biogold every inch around the perimeter, and the candles have been growing out 8, 10, 12 inches. Then we decandle the tree if it's really healthy. We don't do a cutting the weak candles first, cutting the middle strength second, and then cutting the really strong candles third in 2-week intervals. But that is a great way to equalize the strength on a lot of trees. And the reason why we don't do that is, frankly, I have 500 black pines here. I don't have time to go in and do just individual care like that. So what we do is around Father's Day, if we're trying to get really heavy back budding, we will come in and we'll decandle all of the needles. If it's a tree that we're trying to get the needles much smaller and more refined, and we already have a lot of really nice back budding, we will decandle in July or even in August. You don't want to go too late, because if you go too late in the year, what happens is they just don't grow anymore, and then you've defeated the purpose. Because the whole theory of pines, the reason why we do that is the way the pines grow is they issue a bud. The bud elongates, becomes a candle. It continues to elongate, and then the needles open, and then you get what we call the spring the spring candle. The spring candle typically has what we call a neck, where there's no needles. If there's no needles, it will not back bud. So you'll have this long spring candle that's strong. It's really helping the tree. It's making a lot of starches and sugars, a lot of solar panels for energy, but it's really useless for making branches, because you're going to have to graft buds if you want to get it closer. So the easiest thing to do, if you want it to become more compact, shrink the needles, and get back budding, is you actually cut all of the needles off. Now, the reason why I brought this one over wasn't to decandle it, because frankly, this tree is really healthy, but he wasn't really elongating a lot of candles. a lot of the growth was very tight, it was very sparse, and frankly, it's really not strong enough to decandle. So this tree, although he's healthy and he's shaggy, I'm not going to decandle this one this year. I'm going to wait until next year. And then I'm going to go in, actually this fall, I'm going to come in, I'm going to make sure all the tips are cut back to 2s, because that's the third thing that we usually do. We start in November, we'll needle pluck to equalize the strength, and we'll also cut back to 2 buds on the tips instead of 3 or 4 or 5 buds, whatever happens from you decandling or just from a lot of advantageous buds that are activating. Because so again, what we usually do, spring we start fertilizing, Father's Day we decandle, and we can also open it up. Sometimes we'll bring some branches back, and Father's Day nothing more than the thickness of a pencil. Then November we come in where you've cut back the candle, you'll get 5, 6, 7 buds sometimes, especially if it's really strong. You'll cut those back into 2 in November. And the reason why we leave 5, 6, 7 instead of leaving it to 2 immediately, which people do, is if you leave it to 2, here in Florida, we have such a long growth season that those 2 needles, those 2 candles will still elongate pretty long, and the needles will get pretty long. If you have 5 or 6 buds and you let them all grow, they don't get as big. They're much smaller. The needles are smaller because you have more branching in the same square inch of growth, so you don't need to have the needles quite so large, because there's 5 times, or 2.5 times as many needles as there are if you had just left 2. So then in November, when you thin out the needles, you take your back clusters and you cut them back to 4 to 6 needles per tip to equalize the strength from the bottom to the top, because pines are apically dominant. They're much stronger up top than they are down below. So we're always thinning out up top to equalize the strength down below. But November you come in, you cut them back to 2s, and that's when you go in and you do your wiring. You can also do your wiring early spring before the candles start to push, but I usually do my wiring November to February when I wire here. I usually use copper wire for pines as well instead of aluminum. I know aluminum's cheaper, but I've actually found that when you use copper, I don't get needle cast as much. We get rains here every single day in Florida. I don't know if you can tell, but it's literally 90-95% humidity right now. It's raining every single day in July here. Needle cast is a real concern here in Florida. So we usually have to treat with decanyl or copper, liquid copper, or even different types of fungicides that are on the market. I try not to use the same fungicide over and over and over again. But when you use wire, copper wire, I don't seem to have as much of a needle cast issue. I know it's weird, but that's why I use it. So I'm going to show you a pine that actually is healthy enough to decandle, and I'll show you the difference actually. So, I don't know how well you can see this. Let me look. Yeah, that's great. So, this pine I actually got in 2016 when I was a guest artist in Texas. A friend of mine had picked it up from a nursery in California, a pretty famous nursery that does black pines. Apparently this was a fairly old pine when he purchased it, and you can tell that it's an old pine from the bark. It has really, really beautiful rough bark. One of the issues with black pines is you want to really avoid touching the bark. You also don't want moss to grow on the bark, because the moss can rot the rough texture of the bark. So if you see moss, try not to just pluck the plating of the bark off. Try to take it off with tweezers. You can also use a little vinegar spray that'll kill the moss on the bark or kill the moss on the bark without damaging it. That's just something that it's maintenance, right? You also want to grow black pines in very full sun. You don't want to put them in any shade. Even though I know we're in Florida and it's super hot, you want to grow them where it is full sun. They need at least 6 hours of sun a day. And if you have an area where you're only getting, 6 hours, and you're not getting a afternoon sun, or you're not getting morning sun, make sure you do your weekly turning as well. That's important. Okay, I do think black pines grow here very well, but they do require a maintenance program. We do like to spray with the fungicide. We even like to spray with this insecticide because they do get spider mites. They also do get a again, as I said, needle cast. You will get a shoot tip moth that will also come in and completely hollow out the candle. So in the spring, you'll see the candle start to extend, and then you'll see the whole thing just brown out. You're like, oh, what happened? If you touch the candle, it's hollow. Inside, you'll see a little caterpillar in there. And you can use a product called BT for that, or you can even spray as the adults are coming in to lay the eggs. You can spray something to kill the adults before they get a chance to lay their eggs. So this guy right here he is ready to be decandled. The candles are very strong. They're too long really to use. Letting them grow like this was great for the pine. I've been fertilizing the heck out of it to get it nice and strong. Now I'm going to come in and I'm going to cut these candles off. And typically what I cut off is I'll cut and I'll leave about a 1/16 of an inch past where it starts to grow, because that's where the new buds are going to come from. And as I said, anywhere where I trim, instead of having one, I'm going to have 5 or 6 pop, especially if it's strong. And this is a good example of that spring candle. A spring candle, the strong spring candles typically will have a neck. This is what I meant by a neck. You will never get back budding on this neck. And this one doesn't seem so bad. It's like, wait a minute, Jason, that's only a inch neck. That's not really very much. Well, that's true, but they're not always an inch. Sometimes they're 3 inches. That's that's 2.5 inch neck. Sometimes they're, even longer. So that's just something. This was at the base. So this is something to be aware of when you are taking these off. Matter of fact, I should keep these right here so you can see how many I'm going to take off this tree. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to take all of them off, and I'm not going to take the weak ones first and then come back and get the medium. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take them all off at the same time, because what that's going to do is equalize the strength throughout the tree. This particular tree is not for sale. This is one of the nursery's trees at this point. We have many pines that are in the just coming out of, this is pretty much stock phase. We have very few black pines that are this refined at this point, and even this one needs a few more years. But pines are one of those that take time to develop, and I think that's why they're so rewarding. I really enjoy them for that reason. We have 3,000 seedlings between 1 and 4 years old. At that point, you're not doing decandling, because at that point you're not worried about refining as much as thickening. So with a seedling that you're trying to develop, you may let a lot of these just continue to grow, because these are great tools to thicken the trunk or thicken your main branching. But the real trick with pines, black pines, is that you do not want your lower limbs shaded, because if they get shaded, you will have branches that just die. Because remember, trees don't care how pretty they are, they only care what's functional. And especially a pine, if the branches are not creating starches and sugars for the tree doesn't care to keep them. It'll just abort that branch. That's why when you look out in the woods where there is a whole bunch of pines growing in a field, there's no branches down low because they were shaded out. Pine don't care about that. It just cares about getting the maximum amount of sunlight so it can survive and thrive. What we're doing by decandling this is also opening it up lower so the sunlight can get in there, so these branches are useful for the tree. Now it's like, oh, this is functional for me. I won't eliminate this branch that you've been working on for 10 years or 15 years. So an interesting story on this pine is when I got it, the canopy was out 4 feet, had a lot of long shoots. It just goes to show you how well these will backbud. They will absolutely backbud well and clean out. But after the branches get about 8-10 years old, they don't backbud very well. At that point, you have to graft. And there's different ways to a graft. You can do a scion graft, which is what we typically will do. You can also do an approach graft, which will work. That's where you actually have a little tree that you just put along. You match the cambium layers and use grafting tape, and that also works. It's a little uglier. It takes a longer for it to kind of look natural, but it's absolutely is a great way to do it, and you get a lot better success. With scion grafting, you really need to learn it. It's a learning curve. Do 100 of them, and by the 90th one, you'll kind of have it down. And then by the next year, you got to do another 100. By the 85th, you'll remember what it was, how to do it last year. It's really the guys that are really good at it. They do thousands. So it's an impressive skill for sure. So again, all I'm going to do is come through this entire thing and take all of the candles out, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to start cleaning out any of the needles that are facing down, anything that's a little brown or wasn't getting, it looks like it was pretty shady. I'll clean that up as well. And I think I'm going to just learn how to do a fast forward, and I'm just going to get to this now. So hang on. So basically, I've gotten all of the candles off, and you can see the structure again. It's cleaned up. Next thing we're going to do is just clean up the bottoms, make sure the needles aren't shaded out, because they're going to brown out anyway as they continually get shaded. But you got to come in here and clean this up, any of the needles that are facing down. And also, I'm not doing a ton of needle plucking, but you can thin out the needles any time of year. You don't, they always said that do them in November, but you can always come in here and do a little bit of needle plucking to just clean it up, to present it. That's any time you want, really. Also, it's to let the sunlight in there to activate some more buds. What you do want to avoid is kind of damaging a lot of the sheaths. You can even use your shears to cut them close so you protect the buds at the base of every needle, because the needles have a bud at the base of every one of them. So the older needles, once you decandle, take these off, it redistributes that auxin hormone back into the vascular tissue of the plant, and you start getting buds activated, not only at where you cut, but further back into the branching. And that's how you chase foliage back into the branching, as long as you're getting plenty of circulation and sunlight, and there's a viable bud there. this is exactly what you do to keep this guy vigorous and not just continue to blow up as like a balloon. You got to open it up. You got to keep the sunlight in there. You got to keep it thinned. Like I said before, we're going to come back in November. Everywhere where I cut these 1 candles, now I'm going to have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, maybe only 2, but hardly ever only 2. But I'll cut them back to 2s. And one thing you really want to be careful of when you do cut this back is you don't want to wait letting those grow so long that they become to swell. Because what happens is when they swell, you'll get this knuckle at the end. That's one thing you want to avoid if you have 4 or 5 or 6 candles come. You want to cut them back to either a section where they're both on one side, or where they're far enough apart so you can see. You've got to be careful when you cut these back to 2s. A lot of times I just put them where they're best located for the future of the growth of the tree. This fall I'll probably come in here and I'll do another, I'll clean it up, and then December, January, February I might do another wiring just to really refine it out. But it's nice. We have a little bit of needle plucking and thinning to do, but you can kind of see this tree. It's a nice tree. I enjoy it, and it's one that is a fun tree to work on, and it's very rewarding to work on. So that's why I love pines. But thank you again for watching.